The interview. Sally Rooney thinks career growth is overrated. The arrival on September 24th of Sally Rooney's new novel, Intermezzo, is one of this fall's biggest publishing events, not only for the legion of devoted readers hungry for new fiction from the 33-year-old Irish author, but also for the literati ready to devour all the takes and think pieces the book is sure to spawn. Rooney is one of those rare authors who have been able to garner mass readership as well as serious critical attention. I should probably just say attention, full stop. The popular success is, on some level, easy to understand. Her novels, two of which, Normal People and Conversations with Friends, were adapted into buzzy TV series, are precisely observed relationship studies that deftly weave together politics, sex, moral philosophy, dry humor, and a distinctly millennial unease with the state of the world. Fans will be happy to know that the same qualities are on display in Intermezzo, which centers on two grieving brothers, Peter, a lawyer who's entangled with a younger lover, and Ivan, a chess prodigy who falls for an older woman. Any writer who is held up, as Rooney is, as the voice of a generation is sure to be scrutinized. But the amount and intensity of both the praise and the criticism of her output can feel a little outsized, a little confusing, including to Rooney, who, as she suggested over the course of 2 long conversations in July, would much rather let her work speak for itself. In an interview you did with the New Yorker that ran in conjunction with an excerpt from Intermezzo, you said that it's stressful to publish your work and maybe even more stressful to wait for it to be published. Why? The part that involves me putting myself out there and trying to work out a way of talking about my book happens before the public has had a chance to read it. It's a weird mental space to be in. I feel like everything that I had to say went into the book, and I have nothing left to give that isn't already in the text. Has it ever happened where you've paid attention to the discourse around one of your books and then thought, I wish I'd had a chance to respond? I try, and this may sound insincere, not to look at the discourse around my work. And do I ever feel like responding to it? No, I don't think so. I don't need to be over the reader's shoulder saying, what do you think of that page? Connell was a protagonist in Normal People, but the main protagonists in Intermezzo, Ivan and Peter, seem central in a way that men haven't been before in your books. Was it a particular challenge to write from a male perspective? Interestingly, the first voice that came to the page for me in this project was Margaret's, the character who becomes entangled in Ivan's life in the course of the book. It certainly wasn't that I sat down thinking, I have to write a book where the male voice is central. I just felt my way through the story that seemed to emerge when I encountered these characters, which is what I always try to do. Of course, I had moments of self-reflection and self-consciousness, because I was thinking, what do I know about this form of interiority and specifically, which is different from Connell and Normal People, relationships between men? On the other hand, just having said that I try to ignore all discourse about my work, it has permeated through. It filters in. It filters through, and I'm aware that people think that my work is heavily autobiographical, and in fact, it isn't. It felt like they were just fictional characters, like all my other fictional characters, and I was intrigued by them. So the question of gender felt very secondary, but there were moments where I thought, have I got any of this right? Intermezzo is undergirded by grief. Peter and Ivan have lost their father. I was curious about your experience of grief. Were you writing from personal reflection? And if you weren't, was it difficult to write into a feeling so deep that you had not experienced? That's a fair question, but I've never been conscious, in writing about any emotional experience that any of my characters have had, of drawing on something that I have felt or known in my own life. The relationship between fiction and the life of the author is a very live relationship in the minds of readers and critics, and it's a completely unknown relationship in my life. Only when I publish a book do I ever have to wonder what the relationship between my fiction and my own life is. I'm not in any way saying to myself, well, I know that it would be like this because I remember when something analogous happened to me and I felt like this. If I caught myself doing that, I'd think there was something wrong with the way that I was working. You've never read a biography of a novelist? I've actually never read a biography of a writer. There are some good ones. People say that there are, and I'm recommended them on a regular basis. I must have some kind of mental block to reading them. There are natural gaps in my reading, I wish there weren't, but this is more than a gap. It's a stubborn lack of curiosity. I don't tend to wonder about the relationship between the writer's life and the writer's work. Part of it might be that that's an imposed relationship that comes from outside, and I want to resist engaging in that. But I think part of it is a genuine lack of interest. Before I ever became a published writer, I also didn't read writers' biographies or even really know anything about writers. I would know what period they lived in. That's kind of it, and I'm still a little bit like that. Then do you have apprehensions about sharing your political views? You've written about being against the war in Gaza, for example, or about abortion in Ireland. Making your opinions known about these kinds of issues opens up the possibility that people might conflate you, Sally Rooney, with your work. I feel that I have been given a very privileged position in public discourse, particularly in Ireland. I have the power to intervene in public conversations. I still feel disinclined to do it unless I feel that there might be something that I could contribute that I haven't seen said elsewhere. In cases like that, I don't want to use the words moral duty, but I do feel a bit of an obligation. What's interesting to me is that you raise the question of whether that invites people to read my work in a personal way. I think, but what does that have to do with anything? I feel like my political work is there in public and I can stand by it, and I'm happy to discuss it, and my fiction is the same, and that all feels separate from my personal life, which I never want to talk about and doesn't feel like it has anything to do with my work. Those feel like separate things to me.